Go ahead.
Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone to the Marquez Community Meeting for 2021. It's our first one. So hopefully everyone had a great New Year's. So we're excited. This year, I think there's a lot of initiatives, and one of them is the OpenLineage standard that we've been working on and collaborating with others. So we're excited to have Danny, who's going to be walking us through the initial prototype or the design around it and the philosophy behind what we're trying to do with OpenLineage. And Marquez is just one implementation.
Oh, he dropped off there.
Oops.
You're back.
Am I back? Okay.
So you were saying Marquez is just one, and then you froze.
Yeah, one implementation of that. We're hoping other systems begin to adopt the standard and make it a lot easier for data lineage to be scraped from these systems. So we're going to be talking about that. We're also going to be. I'll try to do a quick demo if you guys are interested in some of the versioning APIs that we have. So Alex, welcome again. So the one key thing that Marquez does do is it does maintain that lineage graph, but it also versions data sets. So one of the key things is around if the schema changes. So if you're interested, I'll be happy to walk you through that and just there's a PR out. But I think it'd be nice just to get some feedback from you and what the API looks like and some of the payloads that's returned. So
no, we're a big fan of how you model everything as being immutable and stuff. So
okay, great, awesome. So with that, what we can do, so Danny, if you wanted to take it away and give us an overview on OpenLineage.
Sure. So I'll preface the whole conversation about like OpenLineage, about like what problem are we really like trying to solve here. So one problem that we had like building Marquez and building instrumentation code for various like data pipeline systems like Airflow and Spark is that we have to build and extend the instrumentation code manually. So for like Airflow, we extend the DAG, and for Spark, we build like a JVM agent in order to like dynamically inject code. And we've heard a lot of people like out in the field building their own like instrumentation code in order to like track data lineage, but that tends to be like very hard to maintain. So like in between different software versions can have like different like code, and you can't really trust whether or not like a new version coming out will actually be supported with your instrumentation code. So it's like dually both hard for developers to like maintain their data lineage pipeline software, and it's hard for just users to even use these systems. So we needed like some sort of data format that we all agree on that would be the de facto sort of way to collect data lineage. So like we want like it to be like uniformly implemented throughout, you know, all collection systems as well as all metric instrumentation production, or sorry, telemetry production systems. So like Spark and Airflow and stuff. So like one analogy I just want to bring up like is like a sort of like a railroad track. Like in the early days of railroads, you know, everyone had different tracks, and then you know the rail cars would drive to a certain point, then they'd have to unload the car, load it onto a different car, and because the tracks are different sizes, and drive it somewhere else. We were just trying to find a solution that is just the one size track, so all of these systems can play nicely together. So that's where like OpenLineage comes in, and I'll share my screen real quick here. Let's see here. So this is sort of the OpenLineage model. So OpenLineage, let's see, you know, before we have, you know, all these systems sort of collecting their own instrumentation or the data lineage in sort of different ways and interacting in different ways. We just want one way to be able to collect it all. And so what OpenLineage is just a single JSON payload that defines everything that we need to define. So jobs, data sets, events, and like the run state that it can go down. Sorry, I'm shuffling my notes here. And most importantly, it is extensible. So there's like a simple path to be able to produce an open lineage event. And then there's the more decorated approach of you can add your own sort of facet, which is just like an extensible source, like piece of metadata to like instruct the consumption system to have some sort of behavior or collect data in a certain way. And so I will, so like the goal of OpenLineage is to like really just push this upstream, push it into like Snowflake, into Airflow, into Spark. And sort of like what I'm doing here with this PR in Marquez is just using Marquez as just sort of a reference implementation. So people, like we can get people to use OpenLineage and to like interact with it in a much more like human way, so we can get more feedback about it. And so like how does like OpenLineage sort of compare with like what Marquez currently is? So Marquez currently has a lot of individual REST calls that you make in order to like maintain data lineage. So it's, you make individual calls to create namespaces, to create data sets, to create jobs, to create runs. And it's a very like powerful approach to have like individual calls, because this, you can customize the way you collect data lineage any sort of way you want to. But this just sort of condenses it all into one call. So it's easier for a developer to be able to like implement their own sort of open lineage, you know, producing these telemetry pieces of data, as well as like we take open lineage and we're backfilling it into the Marquez model in order to, so you can like continue to use Marquez like you would normally, but be able to use both types of ways of interacting with Marquez. So we can do like a first look on like what an open lineage event looks like and sort of the different components of an open lineage event. So for a particular event, there's not a lot of fields that are required in order to be able to receive the event. So we have the event time, like when we saw it, the run, and it's a normal like string for a run ID of like how is this uniquely defined. The job, like what namespace the job is coming from, the name of the job, and who produced the this piece of data. And so this is all that's really needed to be able to like receive an event, but this by itself really doesn't tell you much. So like a very simple event of that has some extra data associated with it is we can like receive the event type, like, you know, what state is this particular event in? Like, is it at like a completed state? Did we start it? Did we fail? And then we can also decorate it with different inputs and outputs, input data sets and output data sets. So like they're definitely optional, because not all of your events you'll be able to see your data set at that particular time, or you can only see like a partial data set. So for example, like interacting with BigQuery, you will like submit a BigQuery job, but you won't really know like, and you want to just like utilize BigQuery's like introspection of the query to figure out what the inputs and outputs of that like BigQuery query is. So you don't necessarily, you only know limited information about what your inputs are, but BigQuery will tell you like your schema and all these other pieces of metadata that you can then decorate with it. So you can like incrementally emit sort of data sets with the information that you have available at the time. So in that case, like they are like purely optional, but you know, you definitely would want that to track some sort of data lineage. And so this would define like, and this would be backfill into the normal Marquez model. So any sort of like namespaces that don't exist would be created. Any sort of like data sets, like if they do exist currently, like they would be upserted. We try to maintain the data versions. So like as your inputs and outputs change, like be able to track those over time on like how they change and which runs they're associated with. The extensible component of OpenLineage, and this is when we start to like instruct Marquez to do sort of additional actions. So for example here, like we can start just like at the run, like having like the nominal start time and non-one time, like when we like expect the run to start and finish. We can backfill this information into Marquez to track just sort of like when these jobs were nominally started and ended. Sort of parent facets. So like if one run is spawned from another run, for example, like Spark, like you'll have Airflow implement a Spark operator, and then Spark actually do the run. So these are like sort of conceptually two different runs. Parent run would being like the Airflow run. And then sort of like, you know, job information, like if you have documentation and all this stuff you can use to like help decorate your UI or, you know, perform different actions depending on what type of facet you would want to implement. And these are decorated with like a URI to be able to like, you know, state, you know, what is the contract of this facet? How does this facet, how should this facet like be defined? What is the schema? How should it be defined? And like who produces it, who produced it, and like where it came from. Yeah, and so, go ahead.
Just gonna say, so that's a lot. That was a lot. In terms of, so yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that we're looking to build into the Lineage event when we capture it. But maybe this would be a good place to maybe stop and if someone had questions, and it looks like someone else just joined as well. So if someone had questions, we can maybe answer them now or.
Yeah, or I do. Can you store multiple like events in the JSON blob, or does it JSON blob can only contain one event at a time?
Yes. Currently, the OpenLineage spec only contains one particular event.
Okay.
Are you looking for more like span-like behavior of where like you're emitting like when it started, when it ended, or?
Yep. Yeah.
So span, we've been sort of talking about span-like behavior, including them as a facet in order to like backfill what your like previous knowledge of a particular transition is.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and having multiple events, are you also looking at throughput? So, you know, if you could bundle more events together, it's just less time you have to make that API call as well.
Yep, that's kind of how we're approaching implementing Marquez. Is we collect all the information as the job's running, and then we like send it once. And whatnot. Is our initial approach. Obviously, we're still kind of testing, but.
Yeah, the PR that I put out also includes the DropWizard HTTP2 library, which really does increase throughput over 1.1. Like especially if you're trying to like bundle a whole bunch of like requests together, you can just open one HTTP2 connection and then just be able to like stream them in as you would, like as if you had multiple connections. So it does really help throughput in that sort of capacity, and so it's. But yeah, that's something just to consider.
Okay. Yeah. No, that's good to know. Thank you.
All right, great. I also want to just share something real quick here. Where did my window go? So something that I worked on for a particular hackathon idea is a GraphQL implementation. So I just want to give this as like a sneak peek of something that may be coming down the road, a little bit more of a natural way to interact with the Marquez data model in the background. Just want to show you guys that. So yep, that's all. Thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Danny.
I think that last thing will be for our next meeting, a more full presentation of it.
Mhm. Yeah, I think GraphQL just naturally makes it make it a lot easier to query the metadata that we have. You know, you're always going to have a search endpoint, but if you just want to explore the metadata that you've already collected, especially as we move towards an OpenLineage standard, it's just going to be a lot easier to be able to quickly look up what metadata you're collecting around jobs and data sets. Which naturally you'll still have those REST APIs if you want more powerful, like Danny mentioned, more fine-grained approach to collecting metadata or retrieving metadata, but just having a really slick UI around querying the metadata that's already collected with GraphQL would be a nice plus. Cool. And I could go next. So the one thing that so Danny did mention around a hackathon. So the one thing that I worked on recently was the versioning API for data sets. So being able to retrieve it. So I'm going to go through that really quick. All right. So I'll go to this PR. So I opened up a draft PR. The one thing that we have seen a lot in the community is the questions around, okay, great, I've sent metadata to Marquez around jobs and around data sets, but where are the versions? A lot of the time we just have to say, well, if you query the database, you'll see the versions. But what we want to do is make that a lot easier. And this was always in our backlog. So the two issues that this is addressing, if I could open it up, yeah, is this one here. So naturally you'll want to list versions for a data set. And this is the demo I'm going to walk you guys through is mostly around DB tables. So really if the columns change, the types change, you add a column, remove a column. And that's the versioning logic that we currently have. There is we also do have versioning for Kafka or streams. But that's not going to be part of this demo. And in the future, we'll have things like file systems, versioning for file systems, which is currently not supported. Okay. So I'll go ahead and start the demo. So the first thing I'm going to do is just start up Marquez locally, just through the jar itself. And the one thing that we'll see is the 2 additional endpoints. So listing the versions and also retrieving the version individually. Okay. So I'm going to run through some API calls that just creates the namespace and sources. And what I'm going to do now, so just for the sake of the example, so I'm going to create a data set. And here we just have a data set where, let me make this a little bit bigger. All right. So we're going to have a name. We created a data set under my namespace. So the examples in our quick start, they use these names. So I thought naturally we would use those as well. So here you have a namespace called my namespace. You have my data set for the name of the data set. And then you also have a set of fields. So here, just A, B, C, D, E, and the different types. But what happens often is that data does not stay the same. The schema changes pretty frequently, sometimes multiple times within, let's say, a sprint or a day, depending on how often your data changes. So the one key thing is, let's say that you wanted to add a data set. So before we do that, let me actually list the versions themselves. Right. So in this call, so we're listing the versions, and here you'll see we have this top level field called versions, and within there you'll see that we have my data set. So the example data set that we have, the physical name is really the name the physical name of where the data is actually located in the source. So a lot of time you'll have public.mytable, public.maybe reports, or data science whatever. So that's just how it's named within the source. In this case, it's going to be, I think, Postgres, but that's not necessarily relevant. And then here you'll see the fields. So we'll have A, B, C, D, and E. And let's say, so also the version field itself. Right? And you could also do an individual call. So if I grab this version and I then retrieve it, so let me just have it here quickly. So then you're able to retrieve the individual version itself. Okay. So let's go ahead and now modify the data set itself. So I'm just going to add a column, and the column is just going to be F, and the type is going to be a string. In this case, let me make it more fun and make it an integer. Yeah. I'm not spelling that correctly. There you go. All right, so we're going to be, now what we ended up doing was we have column F and the type is integer. So if we go ahead and list the data sets, we're going to see 2. And then it's ordered by when the version was created. So here you only see a created at, so versions themselves are immutable. So you're not going to have an updated at field or when the data set was last modified. So here you'll see we'll have 2 versions. So one with the additional column and another which doesn't have that column. And again, you could grab the version itself and also make that API call if you wanted to, excuse me, if you wanted to grab that particular version. Right. And the one last thing I'll show you, so sometimes as well, so you add columns to a table, but also you change the type. So if I go here and just type string, you'll see that column F is now a type string instead of an integer. And if I list the versions, you'll now see that F is a string. And the line before it, you'll see that F was an integer. Right? So if you wanted, you could always, if you wanted to list the versions and then compare the different the different types of the columns, or build some custom internal tooling around how your data sets evolve, that's certainly something you can do now. Or when we actually merge the PR and release a version Marquez that has this API. And that's all. That's all I wanted to show you. I'll stop sharing here. So any questions around the API itself, or kind of maybe the internals and how we do the versioning?
When you update like descriptions of a field, does that also version the data set?
That's a good question. No. So descriptions themselves are updated in place. We did think about, do we create a separate table that just versions the descriptions? That's a very good point. We currently don't do that. But if that's something that we feel is important, and versioning the descriptions, that's something we can do as well. But yeah, initially, just for the bookkeeping aspect, we just update this description in place.
So I have a quick question. It looked like the version was a UUID or a GUID. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So the version. Go ahead.
And I guess I'm wondering, that certainly works, internal to Marquez, and it would probably work through your UI for someone who's like troubleshooting and saying, okay, I can see that this GUID changed. I know this version changed. But from a perspective of someone who's publishing a data set for customers, something along the lines of Semver or Calver would be much easier for them to understand. And I'm wondering if that's just a use case that doesn't belong here. And maybe that's not metadata about this data set, or what do you think? Did you give that any consideration?
Julian, if you want to go ahead.
I think so. If there's a Semver number, I would be assuming that this is provided from like someone is making the decision that there's a minor update or major update or something. And so this can definitely be an additional piece of metadata. The version ID internally is Marquez detecting that the thing has changed, right? Like one of the things we care about is this run of a job actually modified the schema of the data set, right? And we want to track this. Or, tracking that the data set has changed versus versus not being modified. And so this is definitely something that could happen. So if someone doesn't provide version numbers or version IDs, we automatically keep track of this has changed at this time as of that run, right? So we know that this data set version was produced by this job running, And then that's a version that was consumed by downstream runs, right? So that's kind of the dependencies that we care about. But we can definitely add extra pieces of metadata, which would be the official version of the dataset. Like, but that's more something like, it's like releasing it, right? Like attributing a tag to the dataset.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I haven't thought about that, but the one thing that we have thought about and what we do want in place for our dataset model, we do want to have this context field or something where you could add attributes to. So it's not necessarily part of the core model, but you can add, you could possibly add things like this is the version of the data set, or the other things that we looked at is how many bytes this data set actually contains. So that's the one thing that we are looking to do, and we just haven't got to yet, but that's a part of our roadmap. It's interesting, we could also introduce this sort of external version. So if you want to version your data sets themselves, Marquez could always map a version internally to an ID that you provide and keep that relationship. Because we currently do that with runs. So you could provide a run ID that's external to Marquez and not use the internal one that it builds, so that we could track the run ID as well. Now we do that with Airflow. So Airflow creates its own run ID, and rather than Marquez generating one on the back end, it uses the one that Airflow provides. But that'd be an interesting issue and discussion to open if you'd like in the Marquez repo, and we could continue the discussion there. But I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, so what I demoed that API, we're looking to merge that in, I think, within the next week or so. We have a few release candidates, but we want to do a more official release that includes that endpoint and also some of the work that Danny's been doing with OpenLineage. So we're looking to merge that in really soon. So that way we have people testing out that Lineage endpoint and testing out the OpenLineage implementation and getting feedback on that. Okay, so that was all I had on the agenda. I'm sorry, all we had. But if someone wanted to talk about Marquez use cases or just bring up any other questions, now is pretty much an open discussion. And Julian, if you wanted to add anything as well.
I have one more question, if you guys don't mind. Have you guys reached out to the Dagster folks or the Prefect folks to talk to them about OpenLineage and getting them to kind of build that in? And were you well received or not well received?
We did. So actually, the Prefects folks, so Chris was the CTO of Prefect, the company is on the OpenLineage channel, and he's been participating to those discussions. So they definitely see the need for it, right? And they kind of participating to a standard. So they're in the effort. And so it's not yet integrated in Prefect, but that'll be part of the plan. It will take a little bit more time to happen. We also talked to the Dagster folks. It's a little less advanced on that side, but they also think that this makes sense, right? To kind of standardize how we collect the lineage. And I think, it contributes to the ecosystem, right? So they provide kind of a better way of scheduling your job or defining your job, making them more testable, like a more sound model than I would say the workflow model. Definitely, they're interested in it.
Well, thanks. And then just real quick, do you think Airflow 2.0 is going to negatively impact you guys at all? Do you think that library that you have now will be forward compatible or backwards compatible?
Well, for one, that's a great question, right? Go ahead, Julian, if you want to.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's part of, yes, it's something we keep an eye on with the branch. I mean, the release, what happened just before, I think end of year, just in December last year. So I think it's going to be fine. There are a lot of things moving around. There's a new notion of lineage in Airflow, but this is all we need to add this in to make this happen. And the other thing we're going to do is just one of the goals of having a clean API like OpenLineage that is just an API and have very few dependencies. It's much easier to just push that in the project itself. So that's still in the works. We've been talking to the community. You know, there are several Airflow PMC members that are involved in that discussion. So the next step for us is to make a proposal on the Airflow to make this plugin just part of Airflow simply, right? So that way it's something that stays in sync with the logic of Airflow as it evolves. So yeah, like, you know, because any release of any of those projects will impact this project negatively, right? Because it's kind of, you need to make sure you're compatible with every version. There's something that's slightly changed. So you want to make sure you invert the dependency and that you kind of just, you can just make sure it's maintained as part of the project instead of always inspecting it from the outside. So that's the plan.
Thank you.
Okay, so a lot covered. And there's about 20 minutes left, but you know, if there's no other questions, yeah, we can kind of end it here. Thanks again for everyone joining. Hopefully you guys had a great New Year's, and again, welcome back. And yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed this. Thanks Alex for joining. And make sure, if you haven't joined our Slack channel or aren't following us on Twitter, please do. We could continue the discussion there. We usually post when we have these meetings. They're bi-weekly. So if you wanted to join, so Marquez is part of the Linux Foundation. We also have a page on that links to our calendar for events that we have. And I didn't get your name, I'm sorry. What was your, it doesn't show up on my, is it Bust?
You must mean me. My name is Robert. My name is Robert Bastian. I introduced myself the other day on the Slack channel. It's nice to meet you guys.
Nice to meet you as well, man. Yeah, thanks for joining. Really good questions. And Robert, yeah, if you wanted to open up that issue to discuss how we could introduce maybe external versioning in data sets, that'd be an amazing discussion to start. So appreciate that.
I'll do that.
And thanks again, Danny, for walking us through OpenLineage. Amazing work, and excited to see that PRB merged. That's something we're going to be working on to get that merged in. And with that, all right, I'll see you guys.
And a Happy New Year.
And Happy New Year's, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.